For professional advice with a personal touch, consult Fuller Landau, Chartered Professional Accountants and Business Advisors. Click on flmontreal.com.
7:06 on today's Entrepreneur, presented by Fuller Landau, a program about the entrepreneurial spirit that drives Quebec business. My name is Dan Delmar, along with Josh Miller of Fuller Landau. Hello, Josh.
Hello.
And this evening on the show, we have François Gaouette in from Amilia, a new tech startup. They do online registration software, pretty cool product, and we'll talk to them in just a few minutes. But first, as we usually do at the top of every episode of today's Entrepreneur, let's take a look at some entrepreneurial news. And the numbers are in for the Christmas holiday season, and it's not great. Retail sales dropped 2% in December here in Canada, according to StatsCan. Josh, we were worried about the impact on retail storefronts, but spending in general going down a bit is probably not a good sign.
Well, no, definitely not a good sign. But I guess from an entrepreneurial standpoint, hopefully you weren't waiting for the stats to come out before you actually act or react. A lot of people have a very, much quieter time of year in January and February, certainly for retailers. And certainly if we're thinking Montreal and we feel the temperature outside, there's not too many people wandering the streets. But the question becomes, are entrepreneurs thinking ahead? Are they waiting for the stats? Are they waiting for the reaction? Or are they taking matters into their own hand, which is really what they should be doing, what they should have learned from the past, and say, you know what, I know it's quieter months. How can I plan ahead? Where do I reduce my staff? Where can I cut some of my overhead? Where can I find maybe the better product that moves this time? Where are the sales got to come out? And of course, you have the rest of the competition that's probably doing the same thing. So you got to keep your eyes and ears and nose to the grindstone and keep your tabs on everything. And again, proactivity. It's reacting is never good enough. You really got to look ahead more than you look back.
So we spent just over $42 billion on stuff in December. And the more troubling part about this is, based on those numbers, they haven't actually fell that low since April 2010. So, shortly after the recession there. Does that trouble you a little bit, that it's a 5-year low?
I think that consumers are spending their money. They're targeting where they spend their money a lot more seriously. There's no doubt they're not. You're an entrepreneur, you're a retail store owner, or whatever you are. Consumers have a little bit less money to spend. They're going to be targeting where they're spending their dollars. You have to be in tune with the market. Do your market research. Figure out what is going to work from a service or product standpoint. And if your competition is selling the same stuff you are, well, then find out how you can do it differently. Find out what can attract the people to your store, to your site, to your business. People will buy. We hear a lot these days about why do you do what you do, and people often buy why you do things, not necessarily what you do. If you ever listen to a TED talk called Simon Sinek, gave this TED talk about why businesses do what they do, and he gave the example of the typical Apple and all that, and he says people will buy a smartphone, but why do they buy from Apple? They buy from Apple because Apple believes that everybody's life should be easier and simpler with this. And of course, they make cool products and all that, but it's always a focus on why. And if you look at the popular stores around town, what drives people into the store? Something a little different. Whether they're eco-conscious, you call them ecopreneurs, or what have you, they're being driven to the store for a particular reason, even though many of those stores have similar product.
Interesting story from Bloomberg News about millennials and how my generation has been recovering after the recession. So they name 4 ways that my generation is still scarred from what happened in 2008. I'll just list them off and get your thoughts, Josh. First of all, not making as much money. That's a pretty obvious one.
Are you scarred from that, Dan?
No, I'm doing all right. Not leaving their low-paying jobs, turning to awful investors, and the fourth is drowning in student debt. All things that are an albatross over the heads of my generation, according to Bloomberg.
Well, student debt, I won't go into the Quebec education program that is rather inexpensive, but there's no question that millennials have gone through quite a transition over the last 5 years. There's no doubt that the number of jobs available have definitely shrunk over the years. You can listen to all the stats you want, whatever, but to go out and find a job is that much harder today. You have to prove yourself. You have your employers that are maybe looking for specific candidates. And the reality is the stars are all taken. You know, if you are great at what you do, and you, even better, you have a great attitude, those people are working. There's no shortage of that. It's those that maybe their attitude's a little bit less. They don't have that right, maybe work ethic. They don't want to put themselves out there a little bit too strongly, or a little bit too, you know, I'm going to go and grab this job, and it's kind of a little more too laid back, and that sense of entitlement comes through. Well, that sense of entitlement will not get you very far for very long. And that's maybe where a lot of the millennials, maybe yourself included or excluded, kind of find yourself is if you maintain that sense of entitlement, it's due to me. If that's the attitude, then there ain't too much it's going to come to you.
I think the boomers have a bit of a sense of entitlement too sometimes, though. Come on.
Well, that depends if if they have their PhD in hand, which I commonly term as Papa has dough. So it really depends on how far they've gotten along in their own family and their own riches amongst that.
But they had more opportunities. So when they were in their up and coming after school in their 20s, 30s than I think millennials do. Certainly more high paying jobs, adjusted to inflation, of course. But they had more interesting opportunities than I think many of my generation do today.
Well, I think the growth and the different type of markets and products and services. If you look 30 years ago, there was little that was offered as compared to today. Today, there's so much out there that's already done and being offered and going, that to find something new really takes a lot of energy and effort to make something even better. And we'll find out soon with our guest from Amilia, to make life simpler and to find that right product or service. 30 years ago, there wasn't much out, or 40 years ago, or 20 years ago, or whatever, there was much less out there than it was today, with access to information and access to these services online or whatever, what have you, is much less today than there used to be. The growth factor is still there. There's no doubt about it. There's plenty of things that are still growing. And the reality is jobs that don't exist today, that will exist in 5 years from now. I mean, they don't even know where to head. So it's got to be a scary time for millennials, no question.
Let's talk about one essential element to being a modern entrepreneur, millennial or not, networking. And this is something that is being highlighted by the founder of LinkedIn, who's a billionaire, wrote a book. His latest book is called The Alliance, Managing Talent in the Network Age. LinkedIn, of course, 300 million subscribers around the world. And it's a tool, I guess, Josh, it's fair to say, it's mostly for job seekers, professionals to make contacts with each other.
I wouldn't say that is certainly one aspect of it, but I wouldn't say that's it at all. There's an extremely old saying that goes, it's not what you know, it's who you know. And if you take that saying and you apply it to today's social media world, that is LinkedIn. It could also be Facebook, but that really is LinkedIn. It's really putting people out there, whether they're professionals, whether they're entrepreneurs, what have you. It's putting them out there to link with each other. Now, it's mostly from a business standpoint. That's where a lot of people look at the differentiation between LinkedIn and Facebook. One is connecting friends. One is connecting entrepreneurs, business people, professionals. And if you can connect those people so you can improve the who you know, well, then what you know will just kind of follow.
So according to Chairman Reid Hoffman of LinkedIn, he says it's not only important, but he just says flat out, your company will not thrive without networking. Quick tips, maybe for those who don't get out a lot, to mingle with their professional associations or mingle with their peers. What's a good way to start networking?
Everybody has a different character, and some people are more comfortable sitting behind a computer, and others are more comfortable going to a cocktail and walking up to somebody and chatting randomly. I think the one thing I can tell you, at least from a professional's aspect, is listen more than you speak. Be an active listener. People always want to talk about themselves. Take advantage of that, and you'll see that the empathy and people opening up will happen much more easily than you may think.
7:15 on CJAD. Today's entrepreneur, our guest coming up, is François Gaouette of Amilia. We'll get to him in a moment, but
For professional advice with a personal touch, consult Fuller Landau, Chartered Professional Accountants and Business Advisors. Click on flmontreal.com.
7:19 on CJAD, inspiring stories from outstanding business people. Dan Delmar and Fuller Landau's Josh Miller with you, as usual, on a Monday evening here for today's Entrepreneur. And this evening, our profile is François Gaouette of Amilia. Welcome, François.
Thank you very much, Dan.
So the easiest question of the night, tell me, what is Amilia? I know it is a piece of software. It makes people's lives easier, but tell me what it does.
Well, the purpose of Amilia is to help what we call the social organization, meaning any type of organization that sells activity, classes, a membership, collect donation, so sports, recreation, association, charity. It's to help them, sell more of their stuff by using the web. Help them, streamline their operation. So basically, what we bring to the table is the ability to be online and not inline for the parent to buy stuff from those organizations. And although we are all involved in many ways in such organization, either because your son play soccer or your daughter is going at the dance studio or you are involved in a chamber of commerce, we don't think as those organizations as being in business and selling stuff. It's true, they're not there to make money, but they're selling stuff. And the reality is that everybody's online and buying stuff now on the web. And so we're just bringing them that to them, basically.
It's interesting, François, as I was getting comments about the promo ad that was airing in the last few days, I get friends coming up to me, go, oh yeah, Amilia, I registered my daughter for swimming lessons, last summer, and I used the Amilia site. It's, it makes life easy. Or, I saw a client earlier today, oh yeah, I registered my son for that gymnastics or play group or whatever through this. Remember. And it just seems like, it's out there, and it's certainly a need. Where did this idea come from? Where did this start? Take us back to kind of the beginning.
It's a bit of luck. I've got a background in investment, and I was lucky to connect with people involved in that space, and I started to look at it on a grain scale. If you look at them on a one by one, you don't feel there's interesting stuff to do with those organizations, because they all have the same characteristics. So they're very local. So because they're local and they don't grow as much as any enterprise, it's very simple why. If you're a tennis club, you tend to serve your community around yourself. You're not going to go take a tennis lesson if you're in Chicago. If you live in Toronto, you're going to take it around yourself. But if you look at one organization like that on a one unit basis, you say, okay, it's not interesting. But when you start looking at it around where you live, you say, gee, there's a lot of them that are all the same needs, which is the same business process of taking a registration, selling a membership, or collecting a donation. And so if I put all of them together, then I've got a really, really interesting business. The reality is that before the web, it was not a model that was feasible, because you have to make it very, very simple for them to adopt. If you look at the profile of your, that tennis club or that chamber of commerce, they tend to be, like I said, small. So not a lot of people involved, one or two people. Most of the time are volunteer. There are people that are involved in their community. So they don't have the resources to buy stuff or to deal with complicated stuff. And we saw what the web did for a lot of industry, and we're just applying it to it. So with a browser, they can run their business now.
I think that's great. And, you mentioned you come from a finance background, and I think you were a venture capitalist at one point, so you turned entrepreneur. Kind of when we come back from the break, we'll kind of hear what was the trigger point, why you kind of wanted to move from one completely different sector into something radically different. That should be interesting coming up after the break.
François Gaouette of Amilia, our profile this evening on today's Entrepreneur, 7:23.
For professional advice with a personal touch, consult Fuller Landau, Chartered Professional Accountants and Business Advisors. Click on flmontreal.com.
7:25. Welcome back to today's Entrepreneur, presented by Fuller Landau. Our guest this evening is François Gaouette of Amilia. They make online registration and e-commerce software for organizations, a lot of nonprofits. François, tell me, you started out as a venture capitalist, as an investor, and you wanted to make a change to go to sort of be on the other end of things and to be an entrepreneur. What made you want to make that rather dramatic shift in careers?
Oh, that's a good question. I really love the investment business because I got to meet everyday entrepreneur, and entrepreneur are really interesting people. I always tell people they got to be a bit crazy to be an entrepreneur because it's really tough, but it's really fun. They're passionate. They'll do anything to live their dream.
So more interesting than venture capitalists.
Absolutely.
Until they switch hats to become entrepreneurs.
Well, it's interesting for me because I'm curious and I got to meet a guy that has a project, a new idea. So I was involved in the beginning of the gaming on the phone. So at that time, nobody was even having a phone that was able to do text, but there were guys thinking about there's going to be game on phone one day. And you're like, okay, that's a bit weird, but this is the kind of people you meet. It's very, very fun.
Not today, everyone on the bus is playing a game.
Yeah, absolutely. So that was I liked it a lot. Problem is that at one point you realize that you're not in the game as a VC. You're deciding where to allocate money, but you're making a bet on a horse, and if the horse is good, you're going to do well, and if the horse is bad, you're not going to make it. And at one point, I thought that I needed to be an entrepreneur and try to build something. It's one thing to give advice to people, but once you never lived it, you don't really. And I was lucky because I came across that opportunity which I believed in. You need to have a lot of faith to start something.
Well, I as you mentioned before, you saw so many opportunities over the years. Why did this one happen to catch your eye?
Okay, well, it could be done without a lot of capital, which is very important because if you need $20 million to build something, you're not in the right place because in Quebec, we don't have we're not in the valley. So simple to understand. Basically, when I explain it to people, they get it. Clients everywhere. No one that will be so huge that you'll do everything for that guy and forget about the others. So because of that, I'm not a really good salesperson. I don't like to sell. I like to, create awareness, explain to people what you can do for them. They either like it or don't like it. So I can move on to the next one. If this one is not a good fit, I'm saying, okay, that's fine. But once you've got a limited number of potential clients, you need to convince them that that's a fit. In my case, and I saw that vision of buying stuff from a social organization.
Did you start off? This got pitched to you, so you started off with other people in this business?
Yeah, there were two other young entrepreneurs involved with me. It was a part-time project, and I was very intrigued by what they were doing, and. Obviously, I really like the business so much that I jumped in and invested almost everything I've got into trying to make it happen. So, and the reality is that I will never go back as what I was doing before.
This is far too fun. It sounds like, anyways.
Well, sometimes it's not fun.
Well, the two partners that you joined with, how did that work? And are they still partners today?
No, they are not partners today. One was a real entrepreneur who really liked to start new businesses, and he did start another business in Montreal that's getting good traction, well known. And the other one was more like a one person type of people. So I think he's doing consulting these days, and it's typical stuff. A company goes through a life cycle like any human. You learn how to walk, and at a different stage of life you move on. Probably the same will happen to me when Amilia gets really big and it's become more like need to be more like operationally focused. I'm really bad at that, so I thought I'll be there at that point.
and we'll talk a little bit more about what you focus on and the team that surrounds you, of course, along with the development, because this product had to get developed from somewhere. So that should be pretty interesting to hear.
François Gaouette of Amilia, our profile this evening on Today's Entrepreneur at 7:30.
For professional advice with a personal touch, consult Fuller Landau, Chartered Professional Accountants and Business Advisors. Click on flmontreal.com.
7:35, welcome back to Today's Entrepreneur, presented by Fuller Landau, a program about the entrepreneurial spirit that drives Quebec business. My name is Dan Delmar, along with Josh Miller of Fuller Landau, and our guest this evening, François Gaouette from Amilia. They make online e-commerce and registration software for organizations like nonprofits, soccer clubs, stuff like that. François, tell me about the development of the product. Software is obviously complicated. It can be buggy sometimes. How long was the process to build the software, to build the program, and to get it right?
Oh, it's too long, I guess. I would say I've been at it at least for that vision of the software for 5 years. So it started by finding the right people to write the code. That looks easy, but it's not the case. And then you need to iterate a lot of time to figure out how to make the thing happen. It looks easy when you open up your browser and you use any app on the internet, or even make a search on Google. You have no idea what's behind that. It's really, really complex. There's a lot of in fact, I'm always amazed to look at my 10 guys that are building software. They only have a screen and a computer, and out of it comes a product. To me, it's pretty amazing. But a challenge we faced was really because of those organizations, the type of client we've got. They, although they're small to medium, they've got really complex business rule. So as an example, first of all, if you come to register your son for a swim class, the organization really wants to know who's going to come swim, because they need to manage your participation. Or if you donate money to a charity, we want to know who's giving money to the charity, or if you become a member.
And I guess they have to manage the liability too. If there's a minor that's in their establishment, then they need to know certain information.
I call that form-based type of transaction. So we need to capture a lot of information. I always say when you buy a book on Amazon don't care if who's going to read the book. They just ship it to you. When you register for that swim class, I care a lot. Who's going to come? What's his name? Is he allergic to peanuts? What happened? Is he break a leg? That kind of stuff. I need to manage a participation, and I need to attach a human being to an activity or membership or donation. So that's unique. And then there's a lot of business rules, such as it's for boys of 12 years old that knows how to swim. Because you live in the city, you're allowed to register before the people that are non-resident. You get a discount if you're 65 years old. And then there's a lot of ongoing communication that has to happen.
It sounds like there's a ton of rules, and it's very specific to each one. Now, you started this, I think, in 2009 is when you kind of got into this. How long before you actually had a first working, I don't want to say prototype, but site that could be used? Well, how many years?
Yeah, it's 5.5 years to get to the what we call the vision of the e-commerce stuff. Mm-hmm. Before that, we were lucky because we started with a good basis on what it was doing. It was really more online registration, and the analogy I give to that is that online registration is like going into a grocery store and going through the spaghetti alley, and at the end of the alley, you pay for it and you're done. You go into their cereal alley and do the same and do another checkout process all the time. It's not very user friendly. So our vision was to create a real grocery store where you put everything in your basket and you pay at the end. So it might be a class for Tommy and an art camp for Susie and something for you, and then you fill all the form for everybody. You pay, you're done, and you've made a transaction.
Throughout the process, because 5 years is quite a long time, was there ever a point that you were thinking about giving up and moving on to something else?
Yeah, it happened many times, because the first crack we took at it to build the vision we had, we did not really work out. The product was way too buggy. It looks good, but when there's people that were doing transaction on it, it was not good. And although again, our customers are small to medium, not that sophisticated, but they live for the registration period. So if they cannot connect the money when it's the registration period, they're dead. They basically, they're not going to survive the season. So our stuff needs to be really strong and make sure that it works.
Now your customer base is really predominantly, I would say, organizations that aren't for-profit companies. They're really not for profit. They're there for the community. This is new to you. This is a new venture. How in the world do you figure out how much to sell it for? How do you figure out your pricing structure to these organizations?
This is a really good question. Many ways. First of all, I need to charge enough. We as a company, we need to charge enough to make sure the product will still evolve. Okay, people tend to forget that because when you buy a car, you have a car in your driveway. It's a car. It's not gonna change for the next 5 years. It's not gonna. So you bought the car. You made your choice. You're really happy with it. When you buy a software, well, it's gonna change every month. So you're buying more like the company, its ability to make the software evolve, its ability to service you. So it's very important that, if you bought something 2 years ago when the company really did not invest in a product, you're probably right now having a product that doesn't support any mobile interaction, which is really bad. Our data point shows that 30 to 40% are registering on our platform through an iPad or an iPhone, or not an iPhone, a smartphone.
Yeah.
So makes sense. When do you want to register your kids to an activity or yourself to an activity? Probably at night in the bed with the iPad and look at around what's going on at the swim pool. So it need to be enough for me to continue doing that. It need to be not too much for those people. It need to show a good return on investment. And the reality which is really simple is the people at the end that pays for it are the parents. Okay? Because how much is it worth for you not to go in line at the community center Thursday night at 7:00 and wait 2 hours with a form and a check? It's probably worth a couple of bucks for you. But
for these organizations to be able to afford it, is it end up being transactional? Does it end up being, we won't charge tens of thousands of dollars to set it up, but kind of a as you use it,
yeah, that's exactly how we've built it. We will recognize that our typical client, they don't have capital. They cannot go and cut us a check for $10,000, and it would make no sense at all. And again, when I told you that there's a lot of money that flow through their hands, so we basically just align ourselves with their business model. So we're going to collect a couple of dollars every time you make a transaction, and if you don't make any transaction, because a lot of those organizations are highly seasonal. So we just made lately a couple of baseball organizations. They did their registration for their summer. Okay, but they're not gonna generate a lot of money in the next couple of months, so it won't cost basically not much for them to use the platform. So we make our money when they make their money, and that's all the purpose of the platform is. We want to make sure that you're gonna do better, and if you do better, I'll do well too. And so far so good, and the value proposition is really good.
Well, I think as you stated from the outset, it was a business that you went in, said you weren't going to make a ton on one single customer, but it was scalable and it could apply to many different organizations, and I would say in many different places around the world. So it sounds like you've achieved just that. Just quickly before we get to the next break, how did you survive over the 5 years with dollars and financing? Friends, family, love money, banks. Quickly, how did it work in 30 seconds?
Friends and family. I've made that's one thing I've learned when I was in my previous job. If you want to make it happen, look at your cash. And so I make sure that I never went too fast and burned too much money up front. So I still have burned too much money up front, but I've tried not to do so. So I was lucky because I had friend and family that believe in the story and believed in me, and that's how we made it to this point. And so
I think it's a tough lesson to learn, but it's one that you go through, and from your history of being a venture capitalist, I'm sure it was something you were kind of used to and knew about.
François Gaouette of Amilia, our profile this evening on Today's Entrepreneur. We'll have his one piece of advice for today's entrepreneur on the way. And next, we'll have Patrick Sullivan in, and he'll talk about some fine print that business owners really need to pay attention to. 7:45.
For professional advice with a personal touch, consult Fuller Landau, Chartered Professional Accountants and Business Advisors. Click on flmontreal.com.
Inspiring stories from outstanding business people, Dan Delmar and Fuller Landau's Josh Miller. As usual, here on Today's Entrepreneur, we have François Gaouette in studio from Amilia, and we also bring in Patrick Sullivan from Fuller Landau. And Josh, we're going to talk about fine print, which is something that is a pain for business owners and consumers alike.
The disclaimer is there's not a single lawyer in this room. So we're talking from a practical sense, from a business sense. Patrick, one of our partners and trustees, you've seen so much from a banking standpoint, from a bunch of agreements when things go bad. What are some of the fine print? What are some of the issues that entrepreneurs should be aware of when they're signing some documents?
Good evening, guys. I honestly believe that one of the criteria is to take sufficient time to read what they're getting involved with, what they're going to be signing, consult, because there's a lot of creativity in the makings of those, what we call them term sheets, and a lot of legalities in those term sheets, and a lot of fine print throughout definitions, throughout ratios, throughout hidden problems that can arise if and only if you run into trouble.
Can you give some examples of some of the stuff that you've seen?
Well, one of the best examples is people normally will do what we call a borrowing base every month. They will report to their banker, let it be the quality of their receivables, the inventory. One of the areas that basically I see all the time that people don't realize is bankers have a terminology that says, we will use a 10% cross-aging. Now, what does that mean? And that's in the definitions in the small print in the way back. That means that if you have a receivable for which 10% or 11% is in the over 90-day column, let's say they will lend you money up until 90 days. If you have 11% of the total amount owing, you wipe out the whole line, which means that if you have a customer that owes you $100,000 and you expect that you would be getting 80% or 90% in your borrowing base, but that customer happens to have $11,000 worth in the over 90-day column, you will get zero financing on that receivable. Now, normally bankers don't really apply this unless you're in trouble. Then all of a sudden it creeps up. And we see that often where people, we didn't realize that this was happening. And it happens.
Things always come to the surface when things are bad. When things are great, then, problems, everybody's making money. You don't really see the problems. It's when there's no money and losses that problems really come out. And I know that's one example, and I'm sure there are many more when we come back from the break. Maybe we'll get from François, from his previous life, a story or two of what he's experienced from that fine print category.
Today's Entrepreneur on CJAD 753.
For professional advice with a personal touch, consult Fuller Landau, Chartered Professional Accountants and Business Advisors. Click on flmontreal.com.
We're talking fine print tonight, Josh. We have François Gaouette of Amilia in studio. We'll have his piece of advice for today's entrepreneur in just a moment. And Patrick Sullivan, trustee with Fuller Landau, talking about what some entrepreneurs should maybe paying closer attention to.
And we were talking a little bit about fine print and banking agreements, and Patrick was mentioning watch out for certain things like, the cross aging if you're borrowing against your receivables. But I'm sure there's other areas, and maybe not just in banking agreements, maybe when you're selling to big box stores and if things go bad, I'm sure in the contracts, say with a Walmart or whoever, there are certain clauses that if something goes wrong, who does the inventory belong to and all that. These are also part of the fine print. What are you seeing there?
Absolutely. A lot of the fine prints, I mean, when you're dealing with these larger corporations, I like to say sometimes they have a tendency to take control of your business. they have these universal terms agreement that they use with all of their suppliers. And these agreements, many times, are very long and have all the different legalities included in them, that they make sure that if you run into a problem, they will literally do whatever they want. They will return your inventory. They will debit your account. Any trick is good, and it's all written loud and clear into their agreements, except that these agreements, you want the business. The entrepreneur wants to get that top line. So sometimes they'll be very negligent on what they're going to be signing, and it's obvious that you never look to a bad situation. An entrepreneur is always a positive individual, but you also have to take to consider that if things get bad, what can happen? What can they do to me that will ultimately render my business either totally insolvent or will put me in enough jeopardy that I will have to reinvest monies into my business.
With all these term sheets, and I'm sure the lawyers are getting creative and putting in more clauses and certainly protecting the banks to the nth degree. Quickly, do you find in your experience that some of these clauses are negotiable, or that's it, that's all, this is what it's in there, and move on?
There's always room for negotiation in a term sheet. There is very little room for negotiation in the security instruments themselves. Yes, an entrepreneur can negotiate a personal guarantee. An entrepreneur can negotiate certain ratio factors, but that has to be done at the offset. Once the deal is signed, it becomes very difficult to come back and reopen the deal and renegotiate, especially if the business is not performing to the degree that, originally people expected it to perform. So if you generate your budgets and you realize what you've said you were going to realize, everybody is happy. But the minute there's a change, then you better have made sure that it's really dealt with at the offset.
Moral of the story: make sure you have a profit, and keep your financiers at bay. And we won't bring François back to his golden years of being a venture capitalist, but we will turn to him as the owner of Amilia and ask you, François, as we do each guest each week, what would be your one piece of advice for today's entrepreneur?
Well, I think it's based on my experience as a venture capitalist. I was involved in over 20 startups, financing them, and I would say always plan for the worst. I've seen so many entrepreneurs come to me and tell me, it's almost done. I'm gonna sign that big contract, and I'm gonna be okay. It never. If people tell you they've planned right from the get-go that it's going to happen like that, it's not the case. We at Amilia we're doing really well, but we're still struggling with some aspect. I don't know in 6 months what it look like, but I always plan for the worst, not to have to be dealing with the fine print, because I know if I have to go see my bank or it's not gonna happen. So take your time. A solid business is built over time, and plan for the worst.
Excellent. Thanks, Dan. My quick takeaway, and it was really very subtle, but François is great what he does, but he also recognizes areas that he doesn't do so well, and he surrounds himself with a good team. We didn't have a chance to talk about the team that surrounds him, but he recognizes what he doesn't know, and that truly is indicative of a successful entrepreneur.
François Gaouette from Amilia, thanks for stopping by, François.
Thank you very much.
And Patrick Sullivan, thanks for joining us once again.
Pleasure.
And Josh will be back next week, Monday night here at 7 on CJAD 800. The Exchange with Lise Ravery is next.